Hey there, TEDx UT Austin, coming to you from my back porch in Austin, Texas. And I want to take a different spin on a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is fear of failure. And I've spoken about this in my past talks, and it's because I'm so passionate about growth and improvement, mostly because I don't really know anybody who ever sets a goal to get less intelligent over their life. I've never heard anybody say, I really need to get rid of the six-pack before the summer gets here. And honestly, who wants to be a worse version of themselves in the future? In past talks, I spoke about how students would have this tendency to pick a class that gives a higher distribution of A's, or they have a reputation for a teacher who's easier, versus picking the class that will stretch them, challenge them, make them work harder, and essentially make them grow and learn more. And I don't want to talk about that kind of failure, actually. The fear of failure I want to talk about is the fear of failing to be right. And I'm seeing this a lot right now on social media. So the example that made me want to dig into this topic was recently I saw somebody post a screenshot of a post from Serena Williams, the famous black female professional tennis player, in which she was venting her frustration about how sick she is of the divisiveness in our country, and that we are all individuals, and that's what makes us beautiful, and we should not be thrusting our beliefs and opinions on other people. So take that message and sentiment and let's set it aside for a second. Here's the part that jumped out to me about the post. It wasn't about what it said. It was more about the fact that the tone and the wording of this message made me even question if it was Serena Williams who had posted this. And it didn't really align to the tone and of what she had been saying on social media, which was about conducting, sessions of listening and dialogue and increased understanding. And there were a lot of people that were posting this screenshot of her post. But when I would go on her Facebook account or Twitter account, I couldn't see any place where she had actually posted this. And there were famous athletes that were tweeting this, and it was going, somewhat viral from what I could tell. It was definitely spreading. And so, a lot of people were agreeing with her, and some were, having their own disagreement opinions. Here's the thing. My first impulse was to post a comment to this person who had posted this and just ask, is this Serena Williams? The Serena Williams. Because the implication is that, hey, this is a celebrity's opinion and it seems to be relevant. I decided to forego that because I know that most conversations that happen on comment threads don't go anywhere productive. And I have been guilty of being part of those unproductive comment thread discussions or arguments in past, and I wanted to avoid that. But what I felt in my heart was that this is an example of confirmation bias. So I went and did some research, and turns out Serena Williams did not post this. In actuality, it was posted by a completely different person. It was a non-celebrity who notes on her Facebook page that she is not the actual Serena Williams, that one. And it was interesting too because people had shared a screenshot of the post. So there was no way to really click on it to go back to Serena Williams' Facebook page to actually validate if it was Serena. So it kind of masked that whether or not it was or wasn't Serena Williams, but it kind of insinuated that it was. Now, some of you may say, hey, it doesn't matter if it was Serena Williams, the celebrity, or not. I would say it's interesting because a lot of times I've seen where a famous person or celebrity speaks up on any side of a political spectrum, and you will see that people will disagree with them by saying, look, you're just a celebrity, you're not an authority, keep your opinions to yourself. But it is interesting that when a celebrity agrees with you, you are more likely to share and repost that opinion as a way of legitimizing your own opinion. You see, this happens all the time too when memes of famous people with quotes that they didn't even say will go viral. And this is a form of confirmation bias. And so it's important to understand what that means. So our behavior is guided by two things, unconscious brain and our conscious brain. When those two disconnect, that can cause us to think we're right even when we're wrong. Many of you may be thinking, hey, I know a few people who need to hear this. But it's important to note this, that it affects everybody regardless of your political beliefs, your intellect, your sex, your age. And we all show favoritism towards things that confirm what we believe and what we value. Therefore, any evidence that supports our way of thinking, whether that's a researched study or paper, an op-ed, or just a random screenshot of a stranger's social media post, all of these sources are basically given the same amount of legitimacy and trust. And I was curious why our brains do this, because I'm not a social scientist. But what I learned is that our brains do this as a mechanism of efficiency. It creates shortcuts for us so that we can reduce the amount of information that we need to process to form opinions. And these shortcuts, these shortcuts pose kind of problem in our world today, because we live in a time where we're having information overload. Our brains are constantly wanting us to take shortcuts to form opinions because we're getting so much information thrown at us and we can't process it all. So the more we are scanning through social media, seeing different news and opinions, it's starting to force us to kind of form opinions without doing research, without questioning things. And so these shortcuts can form patterns in our unconscious brain that actually affect our conscious opinions and behavior. And it's why we can develop stereotypes. And worse, it can cause us to be kind of unwavering in our opinion, even when we know objectively that we are wrong. And confirmation bias will create this tendency to search out, to favor, to like, to share, and even recall data or posts or whatever, or articles or evidence that support our personal beliefs and values, even if that stuff is misleading or not correct. And it's also related to something called hindsight bias, which is a way of basically kind of letting go the things that we disagree with, but yet retaining the things that we agree with. So let's talk about some examples. I was talking with somebody and we were discussing COVID-19, and in the conversation, this person brought up, hey, do you know what COVID-19 actually stands for? And this happened to be the one time, and I would say it's very few times, but the one time I actually had Googled this myself. I found on the World Health Organization that it stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. World Health Organization, I think, is who named it. And so I asked this person, well, what does it mean? And they said it stands for Chinese originated virus something something. And my first reaction was to correct them and tell them it wasn't true, but I actually kind of explored this with them and I said, interesting, are you sure about that? And they said, absolutely, yes, sure of it. So I asked them, where did they hear that, or where did they, what was the source? Right? Expecting a website or an article or something, and they said, actually, a friend of mine told me. They're a registered nurse, and they told me. Now, in defense of this person, first off, it doesn't stand for Chinese originated virus, but in defense of this person, a friend of theirs who they trusted, that they see as a healthcare professional, had told them this, and inherently they have some form of bias inside of them that did not make them question that. They didn't say, hey, that doesn't sound right. It just made sense to them. The virus started in China, it did originate there, and so they just didn't question it. Later, we did confirm on Snopes that yes, it does stand for Coronavirus Disease 2019, and that was an interesting experience. But again, it shows a great example of confirmation bias. Another example I saw on social media, someone had posted a very interesting meme about saying, "Do not forget that Tim Tebow knelt during the national anthem in protest of abortion." Now, if no matter where you sit on this topic of Colin Kaepernick, it would be rather hypocritical if Tim Tebow was allowed to kneel during the national anthem and Colin wasn't able to protest peacefully in the national anthem. If you go on Snopes.com, you will find that that is not true. Tim even clarified it that he did not kneel during the national anthem. And again, regardless of where you sit politically, what this shows is that people have when they see something that and they inherently agree with, or that it doesn't challenge their way of thinking, they are more apt to agree with it. And where you disagree with it, you might go down and say, look, I'm going to go validate this source. I'm going to get on Snopes. Let me use one more example. I've seen this constantly on Facebook where someone will take a bunch of legal jargon and they will copy paste it into their Facebook wall and post it, and they expect that by doing this they will retain full rights of their content, or that it will alter their friend's algorithm or something like that. And this example is kind of less contentious because it's not political and it doesn't really challenge our core values, but it still shows confirmation bias in a way, because one, someone you trust or a friend of yours that you're close to, that you look at what they post, they look at what you post, you're interacting, you're liking each other's posts, you're sharing those things. Well, someone posts this and says, hey, if you copy paste this text into your Facebook wall, it will fix your friend's algorithm. Okay, first off, that is not true. But when it's coming from a source that you trust, you aren't going to likely question it, whether it's real or researched. And later, if somebody I've seen this happen where people will come back and they'll post a link to the Snopes article and saying, hey, this isn't true, Snopes debunked this, it will not reset your friend's algorithm. In the end, no harm is done because we're not having to have a political debate over this, but it does point out this underlying issue that creates a problem. And the one thing that I think that interests me about this Serena Williams post, if you go back to the context, is this. The post is talking about how we should not thrust our views and opinions on people. When we are surrounded by people that we like and agree with, we tend to feel that the people who disagree with us are thrusting their views on us, and that they are not the open-minded ones, we are. But at the same time, let's say that person does something within their legal rights that doesn't actually violate yours, but it offends your way of thinking. Question is, are you going to be able to not say something about their opinion or voice your opinion? And I see this happening on all sides of the spectrum, where someone will say, I'm open-minded, this other side is closed-minded, but then all of a sudden, when something happens on this side they disagree with, they immediately say, I disagree. And here's the thing. If you're not getting if you're getting news from social media, but also you're just taking in viewpoints and opinions, it's important to understand that in social media, confirmation bias is amplified on steroids. The use of algorithmic editing is going to filter out things you disagree with, and it's going to show you more things that you agree with. This is why when we share something on Facebook or Twitter, you're going to get a lot of positive reaction from it because you're probably surrounded by people that agree with you. Even if you post something that isn't true or something that is misleading, you will get lots of positive reinforcement. And less we're actually seeing the views that challenge our own. And even when we do see a view or opinion that is different from ours, it becomes very frustrating because it's challenging something inside of us. It's challenging our core beliefs. It creates concern, anxiety, sometimes even anger, or just a desire to shut down the dialogue and not seek any understanding. And it's also interesting to note that confirmation bias exists in all places of our life, not just social media and politics. For example, it exists anytime you have a deep-seated belief that is being confirmed by any form of evidence. So take, for example, investing in the stock market. I could tell you right now that I know technology. I work at UT. I'm a lecturer there, and you can trust me that investing in the video chat company Zoom is a really good idea. You should do it. Immediately, some of you will disagree with me and say it's too late, or there's a number of reasons why it's not worth it. Some of you will agree with me. Regardless of what you think, studies will show that if a person holds a belief that a stock is a good investment, they will likely invest in that as long as they can find one article or opinion that agrees with them. Even if there's a substantial amount of evidence that counters their opinions and belief, they will still invest in it. And this is because of the bias that we are all programmed with and our tendency to favor those bias. So the key takeaways are this. 1, don't assume that you don't have bias. You do. If you're thinking, hey, I'm super objective, I don't have preconceived notions of other people and other opinions, or I look at competing news sources, that does not negate the fact that you have bias towards things that confirm your beliefs and opinions. It's just programmed into our brains. 2, even if your smart, trusted friend tells you that something, tells you something that totally makes sense to you in your mind, it's probably best to check it and challenge yourself to ask them for a source where you can learn more and see if they can give you one. 3, even if a news source that you trust tells you something that you believe, go research it, fact check it, do your own work in terms of looking it up on Snopes or whatever your fact checking website is. And 4, recognize that looking at opposing views will make us uncomfortable and anxious, and that's okay. In fact, if you're feeling conflicted and challenged, you shouldn't worry that that's a sign you're being brainwashed. You should just basically realize that you're challenging yourself not to take the shortcuts that can cause us to be less objective. So in light of what's happened with, George Floyd, there have been, to some people's opinion, peaceful protests. There have also been riots, and there has been violence, and there has been looting. And while both have happened, depending on your core values or core beliefs, your source of news, and your own confirmation bias, and the opinions that you surround yourself with, you may see it more as more protest than riot, or you may see it as more riot than protest. It's important that we remain objective. And even as I say you should remain objective, you may be interpreting that I'm kind of pushing you in one direction to be sympathetic to one side or the other, and I'm not. So what I'm saying is be aware of your bias. Understand that bias does not inherently make you an immoral or bad person. And you should challenge yourself not to rush to believe something just because you agree with it. And you shouldn't rush to disagree with something just because you don't understand it. Instead, rush to humility. Admit that you don't know something and that you're open to learning about it, to ask the hard questions, to grow, even if that's going to be a little uncomfortable for you. Thank you for joining me today, and book 'em horns.